In this video, let's talk about named slots. Why do we need named slots? Let's look at an example first. Let's go to VS Code. Let me create a Git branch for this view concept, so it will be easier for you to review the code later. Git branch view named slots. Let me create a component here. Let's call this base layout.view. I want to use this component as my basic layout of my web page. So in this div, let's have a header, main, and also a footer. Those are three semantic HTML elements. And in between, we want header content here. We want main content here. We want footer content here. Here, you can choose to define some styles for header, main, and footer to make them look very nice. But this is really the basic structure, the basic layout of our web page. So in the header, maybe we can put our company's logo, a navigation bar. In the main element, we can put the main content of the page, and the footer contains copyright, contacts, address information, and so on. Okay, so this is the basic structure of my web page. Then in app, let's first import base layout. And let me get rid of this one. And here we can use the base layout. Next, let's see the result in the browser. Right now, there's nothing in base layout. So here, let's put something. Header, main, and footer. So now we have the content hard-coded in the base layout. But this does not make sense, right? Because the content of the header, main, and footer are supposed to be provided by the consumer component. You're like, okay, that's easy. So let me pass them as the template content. Header. And then, how do I pass the second one? How do I pass the third one? Can I do this? Header, main, and footer. Well, you cannot do this because this would be passed as one content, not three. Now we need to pass three different contents. The first content goes to header. The second content goes to main. And the third one goes to footer. So how do we let view know that I'm passing three different things to three different sections? In this case, header, main, and footer. We need three slots. Okay, so here, let me delete this. Slot. Okay, let me copy this. Paste and paste. All right, so we have three slots. But take a look here. So if I pass one content here, this one content will fill up the three slots. So how does the consumer component pass multiple contents to one component? We need to use named slots. That is, we're going to give each slot a name. In slot, there is an attribute called name. And let's call this header. Well, that's the best name. And this one is, let's call it main. And down here, it is footer. So now each slot has a name. So if I refresh, this time, this header, main, footer will not show here. Then what should we do? Let me delete this. To provide contents to named slots, we can use v-slot directive on a template element. And let me show you. Template, v-slot colon, copy, paste, paste. All right. Now, after the colon, we should put the name of the slot. So the first one is header. Second one is main. Third one is footer. Okay. So here I can use, for example, h1. Here might be a page title. Okay. As you can see, this h1 is passed to the first slot, the slot with name header, thanks to v-slot colon header. Now, what about this one? So here, let me put a page, a paragraph of the main content, and another one. Okay, these two paragraphs will replace this slot, the slot with name main. And last but not least, we have the footer, right? Here's some contact info. Okay, we're done. So here, this h1 will be passed to the first slot, this 2p's passed to the second slot, and this p will be passed to the third slot. Okay, so here I want to show you the rendered HTML code. So let's go to the browser and press F12. Refresh. Okay, go to Elements. So here is the header. It has h1. This is main, has 2 paragraphs, and footer has 1 paragraph. So this template element would not be shown here. All right. v-slot directive has a dedicated shorthand, which is the hash or the pound sign. So we can get rid of this v-slot and replace it with pound. And also we need to get rid of this colon. All right. Much simpler. Next, I want to show you something called default slot. So let's go back to base layout. Okay, so here I'm going to remove the name of the second slot. And now as you can see, we only have the header and the footer. View cannot find a slot with name equal to main, so these 2 paragraphs will be lost when passing to base layout component. So here is the rule. In one component, you're allowed to have 1 slot with no name. So in this case, we have 3 slots, 2 are named slots, and this is the slot with no name. Well, in this case, how do we pass the 2p's, the 2 paragraphs, to this slot with no name? Very simple. We can get rid of line 6 and get rid of line 9. Okay, so let me put an empty line here to make sure you understand. Everything inside template, like this one and this one, will be passed to the corresponding slots, header and footer. Any content not wrapped in a template using v-slot is assumed to be for the slot with no name. And we call that the default slot. So this one is really the default slot. So in this case, these 2 paragraphs will be passed to this default slot. I always want to give an explicit name to every slot, so it is crystal clear where things go, right? So I really prefer to give this a name, like this. Well, actually, in this case, it seems like the slot at line 9 has no name. Behind the scenes, it also has a name, and the name is default. Let's undo the changes. Come back here. Okay, default. This is what happened behind the scenes. If we do not give a name to the slot, View will give a name to this slot, and the name is default. And here behind the scenes, these 2 paragraphs are wrapped by a template that refers to this default slot. All right, let me change it back to main. Same thing here. Okay. So this is recommended. I recommend you give a good name to every slot. So that makes it clear where things go. Sometimes you want to render something based on whether or not a slot is present. In this case, you can use the $slots property in combination with a v-if directive to achieve this, like this example. As you can see, in this example, there is a card component and there are two conditional slots, header and footer. So this div will only be rendered if the consumer component provides content to the header slot. Same thing here. This div will only be rendered if the consumer component provides content to this footer slot. Okay, so we're done with named slots and conditional slots. In the next video, let's talk about scoped slots. See you there.